I'll quickly introduce Hansi Liu-Atkinson. She's the Energy Manager at BC Ferries, responsible for the Corporate Energy Management Program, which integrates emissions reduction, energy efficiency practices, and capital planning. Hansi has over 10 years of experience developing systematic programs for environmental permitting in construction and impact assessments with focus on climate change mitigation and adaptation. Thanks, Hansi. And I'm sorry, I'll just ask you to move quickly, but get your key messages across. Thank you so much.
I will speak as quickly as I can. Thank you very much and good morning. And thanks for this great opportunity to be on the panel today. At BC Ferries, one of my priorities is to support the organization to transition to a low carbon future. And on behalf of the organization, I'd like to say that we're very excited for all of the energy options emerging for the transportation sector. It's great to be here connecting with industry experts and to understand opportunities and constraints for hydrogen in particular. Next slide, please. For those of you who aren't familiar with BC Ferries, I just want to take a moment to provide a bit of a snapshot of our organization. I won't go over every detail here, but just want to highlight that at our core, our mission is to connect communities and customers to the people and places that are important in their lives. With 37 vessels operating out of 47 terminals, our operation needs to be quite dynamic to meet the needs of people traveling throughout coastal BC. But at the same time, our service needs to be reliable, safe, and affordable. Next slide. Now, when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions reduction planning, BC Ferries is guided by provincial, federal, and international regulatory frameworks. In 2019, we released the Clean Futures Plan that outlines our overall strategy to transition the organization away from high carbon intensive energy sources. The plan provides a conceptual path forward for our vessels and shoreside assets, with a particular focus on supporting Clean BC's 2030 target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. Go right ahead there. When we look at our fleet, we generally separate the discussion between vessels and shoreside assets. This is because the footprint of our vessels is so large compared to our onshore vehicles. And we want to make sure that initiatives on the shore side are not overlooked just because they have a smaller emissions footprint. So I'll begin here with an overview of fleet vehicles. Next slide, please. Now, BC Ferries has roughly 350 fleet vehicles operating across our terminals. They range from light-duty vehicles to heavy-duty commercial vehicles that support our O&M needs. It's our policy, actually, to gradually replace our vehicles with electric or other low-carbon options as they reach major maintenance milestones or end of life. One of the focal points is actually these yard trucks you see in front of you, operated by Commercial Services. Commercial Services is a drop trailer service, so companies can drop off their shipments at a terminal and then we'll drive them on the ship to be picked up at the other end of the sailing. Next slide, please. The BC H2 Ports project is a great opportunity for the commercial services business. I won't repeat project details that have already been summarized, but I just want to quickly speak about why we feel that this is an important opportunity. We anticipate 2 yard trucks will be trialed at Tsawwassen Terminal, one of our commercial services hubs. The idea is to really proceed with business as usual. The hydrogen trucks will directly replace 2 of our existing diesel yard trucks and will be operated by our drivers. The project really allows us to do some critical testing before we make significant fleet decisions. In making investment decisions, BC Ferries has to balance risk, and we need to prioritize safety and reliability. And this project really helps to bridge that gap between our push for innovation and providing our customers with a safe and reliable service. Next slide, please. The requirement for safety and reliability is certainly extremely critical when we dive into our vessels. Our vessels represent about 98% of our emissions footprint, and currently they predominantly consume diesel and to a lesser extent LNG. Next slide, please. As we show in the Clean Futures Plan, our strategy for ships involves 3 areas of focus. This includes increasing renewable content of our fuel, increasing energy efficiency, and adopting alternative energy sources. A new construction offers the greatest potential to achieve the most substantial reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Looking ahead at our long-term capital plan, the key opportunity ahead is the new major vessels, which will become the next flagship fleet for BC Ferries operating at our major terminals, so Vancouver to Victoria or Nanaimo. There are currently 5 new major vessels in the capital plan, with the first one anticipated in about 5 years. But evaluating energy sources for large vessels is a little bit more complex than fleet vehicles. Next slide, please. Now, this slide shows at a high level some of the energy sources we are considering for the future of our fleet. Fuel carbon intensity is certainly one of the main factors we consider, but the same fuel can have different carbon intensities depending on how it's produced. Hydrogen in particular has quite a wide range depending on if it's produced from natural gas or via electrolysis. And in order for us to reach the kind of impact we want to on emissions, we want, perhaps not surprisingly, we want to prioritize green hydrogen for our vessels. BC is a perfect place to push a green hydrogen industry with hydroelectricity powering our province and our other industries. Outside of transportation, green hydrogen also has a lot of potential to support other energy sources. Hydrogen, for example, is required to produce methanol and ammonia. Hydrogen could play a critical role in the future of the overall framework of decarbonization beyond just one sector. Next slide, please. On the technical side, fuel properties are also quite critical to consider. With LNG, for example, the boiling temperature means that cryogenic storage is required for all our LNG vessels. And this requires a fairly specialized materials that can withstand this temperature. As you can see, hydrogen has an even lower temperature, which will require a greater design care. As another example of the complexity of this low temperature, at the point of a disconnection, we also can't purge with the current method of using nitrogen as we do with LNG, because the extreme temperature of hydrogen would essentially cause that nitrogen to condensate. Density and storage volume for hydrogen are also constraints, and generally it's less favorable when it's compared to other energy sources. But this all being said, there is no one path forward to address these technical constraints. Circling back to methanol and ammonia, these 2 potential fuel options produced from hydrogen may offer a feasible path to help solve these storage challenges. Next slide, please. Another important aspect for us to consider is overall energy efficiency. With our current diesel vessels, we know there is a significant amount of energy loss from production all the way to combustion. Energy efficiency has broad-reaching impacts, of course, such as on land use, infrastructure, emissions, and costs. So we do want to look at options that has a better energy efficiency than what we have now. Hydrogen would be an improvement, certainly, but it's still not ideal at this time, especially when we compare it to another source like electricity. Next slide, please. Now, to provide an overall conceptual example of energy required to sail a new major vessel, here we have an example from Tsawwassen to Source Bay or Vancouver to Victoria. We estimate that one sailing would require roughly 14 megawatt hours of energy, and this would in turn require over a tanker of hydrogen a day. Keep in mind, there are 5 new major vessels planned, and some anticipated new major vessel routes would need well over 14 kilowatt hours for a sailing. And next slide, this should be the last one here. BC Ferries, of course, needs to further evaluate the feasibility of adopting hydrogen as a marine fuel, but we see a lot of potential here. One thought is to consider a transitional option that first includes gray or blue hydrogen and then moving to green hydrogen when supply is more secure. The key is that we have to offer a reliable service to our passengers, and the decision for energy sources must meet that requirement. We do look towards government to provide much needed support. To put it simply, it's very difficult to make fleet decisions for 50-year life assets when we don't know where the energy source will come from. Next, we're also looking for funding support to adopt hydrogen. Otherwise, it would essentially mean raising fares substantially to offset costs, and that is really not feasible. Outside of funding, it's really important from our perspective to have enabling policies and programs, especially on a sector-specific basis, that helps to bridge the gap between ambitious regulatory targets and on-the-ground application. If Canada is going net zero by 2050, the provinces have to be aligned and all be headed in that direction. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult to implement. But it's clear that we're headed in a really positive direction. So I'm definitely looking forward to helping to evolve our fleet to a low carbon future. Thanks very much.